This is Audiogyan, and I am your host Kedar Nimkar. Welcome to a deep dive into the minds of luminaries from the Indian creative world. Welcome to Audiogyan. This is a part of a series, Where Are the Designers? It's a 12-part series featuring few of the top influential design leaders in India, talking about the process of hiring, challenges in finding and retaining talent, and some tips for young designers to make a cut after they apply. I'm so happy and proud to introduce my co-host for this series, Abhinit Tiwari. He works at Gojek. Hey Abhinit, welcome back.
Hey Kedar, happy to be back again. And we took a fair bit of a gap between the last one and this one, no?
Yeah. It's been like 2-3 weeks, but yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. And today we have Shreyas Satish with us on Audiogyan. Shreyas is the founder and CEO of Ownpath. It is dedicated to help professionals grow in their careers through lifelong learning and professional networks. We'll know more about Ownpath in our conversation. Shreyas was previously with Hasgeek and Mapunity. Thanks, Shreyas, for giving your time, and it's a real pleasure to have you on Audiogyan.
Thanks, Kedar and Abhinit, for having me.
Cool. So we have like a rapid fire round, especially for this series. And these questions were not shared. So I hope you're game for like a quick, like just a warm up round to get to the actual questions.
Sure.
Cool. So the first one is your favorite buzzword in the recent time within the design community of India. Like, आजकल क्या चल रहा है? Like, buzzword क्या है? It's a rapid fire round.
It's okay, no pressure, Shreyas. We'll edit the gaps out.
Webflow. I'm noticing a lot of Webflow conversations for sure.
Which one?
Webflow.
Webflow.
Okay. I thought it was just like you really gave like an important answer, but I was thinking ki ESOPs, yeah, ऐसा कुछ रहेगा. Like design leaders, I'm a mentor, I'm a speaker, वो सब रहेंगे, but ठीक, yeah.
These days, though, it's salary survey, Kedar.
Salaries, yes.
And design titles also, quite interesting. Anyway, the second is, what do you look in a designer, attitude or aptitude?
Both are important, but if breasts that go with attitude.
Okay. Recently found app which you liked?
Wow, this is difficult. You mean like a recent app that I installed?
Yeah, you found anywhere. You've heard about it, found it, used it.
The one I use the most is Notion of late.
Okay.
So definitely have very good things to say about it.
Superb. And the one which you hate the most?
Oh, too many.
Most hated.
Too many. Yeah. I think government apps in general.
Okay. Nice.
That's a very diplomatic answer, Shreyas.
Okay. Your favorite typeface?
Oh, I'd probably go with the one that we're using right now, Rubik.
Okay. You have any favorite design quote or any quote in general which you like?
Good design is invisible.
Okay, now this is a fill in the blanks. This is a new format, Abhinit, okay? Fill in the blanks. Designers should design and dash.
Communicate.
Wow. ये सब जगह डालना चाहिए था actually. हाँ, ठीक है. Design school, design class, self-taught designer. Whom would you pick as a mentor at Ownpath? Like who has passed from a design school or a design these classes or?
Oh, it really doesn't matter. Okay. It comes down to what their skill level in terms of craft is and how they communicate. Their background doesn't matter.
What's easier, being a designer or a CEO?
So I've not been a professional designer, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
But definitely being a craftsperson was way easier.
Way easier.
At least in certain aspects, because I think it's easier to fall in love with while doing the craft, whether it's designing or developing. Whereas there are aspects to the CEO which you're more excited about the outcome than the process itself. But you have to keep going because the outcome is what keeps you going.
Awesome. Zoom or in-person classes?
So this is tricky. I think both, But this is a rapid fire, so I can unpack this a little later if you like, since it's so relevant.
Yeah. So Abhinit is making notes anyway, so he'll circle back on certain questions. All right, that was the rapid fire round. Abhinit, you want to go first?
Yep, let's start. So, Shreyas, to kick things off, let's talk a bit about you and Ownpath. If you could tell us, why did you decide to start up with this? Is there anything missing in the current educational setup? And there are already a lot of classes and cohort-based programs now. Like, so what is it that you think is triggering all of these things all of a sudden?
Sure. Can I give you a bit of backstory?
Yeah,
Before I
Please,
get
please.
to what's happening with OwnPath. So I think there are like quite a few experiences that I've had in my life that have like nudged me towards what I'm doing right now, and that's kept me going, because doing a company is just mind-numbingly hard, right? So one of the earliest experiences I remember was when I was, I think, around 10. My mom actually had quit her job when I was born, and then my younger brother was born, and she didn't really get back to work for like very long time. And when I was 10, she wanted to get back to work, but she couldn't because she used to be a banker, and like ATMs had become common, technology had changed, and like becoming a banker itself, that profession had changed by the time she wanted to get back. So the alternative she was considering was, okay, maybe I'll, become a teacher in a school. So, and I still remember the day when she came back from the interview and she said, these folks asked me if I had experience with teaching. And I told them I only had experience with teaching my kids, but no real experience with teaching, generally. And how am I supposed to have that experience in the first place if I don't have that experience? Like there's this catch-22 problem that happens when you're, making that career transition.
Yep.
Of course, only later on, I sort of realized that the issue there was less about my mom, but more about the education system, which doesn't really help people prepare, one, for jobs as well as it should be, and second, help people adapt to changing circumstances. Right? I think this whole model of you learn something for like 4 years and then you're set for life is just totally obsolete. Has been totally obsolete for a long while now, right?
Yeah.
So I think on a sort of a macro picture, that's the problem. That's the premise I started with. Basically, how do we have a system that's more adaptable, that's more around lifelong learning, like in our introduced way. I think the other aspect, of course, is design, because people sometimes ask me why design. What is this emphasis on design? I've been excited to learn about design for a few years now, and I fortunately had a few friends who were designers. In fact, my housemate was a designer, and incidentally, he was teaching a course at NID. And there was this one day when I asked him, "Can I just like pop in to your course at NID?" Right? Like, and he said, "I would be happy for you to come, but I don't think NID will allow." Right? And interestingly, I think later that year, I was on a visit to the US, and I was staying near Palo Alto, and I got a chance to visit Stanford on a fairly regular basis. Right? I sat in on a few talks. I went to some workshops, and I think my biggest takeaway from that was sort of how open that environment was. That I could just walk in, I could just go to a workshop, I could just sit in on a talk, I could talk to people there, I could talk to a professor there, right? And that sort of an environment didn't seem particularly accessible to me in India, right? So I think those were like fairly key influences in me getting to think about how do we like imagine an alternative in India, especially, right? An alternative to the traditional system, which is more open, which is more social, to learn, because I've really enjoyed learning in a social environment. And honestly, this is something I wanted for myself. Like it started off being I want to learn design, more about design, and I think that I really love learning that and by building projects and by learning from senior folks, and it really started from there. Solving that problem for myself. But with the larger sort of premise of we don't have an education system that has sort of kept up to what is actually required.
Sure. So, would you chalk up the recent rise of such programs to basically, the lack of whatever needs the education system currently is not fulfilling? Or do you think there are more reasons to why these things are emerging than that?
I think the pandemic has played a role. in terms of, because a sort of a cohort-based course does multiple things for people, right? I mean, learning skills is obviously one, but it also gives you a focused environment in which you share a certain purpose with other people, right? And that sort of brings in a sense of community that helps form bond, helps you make friends. And I think those sort of environments have been very lacking, especially during the pandemic, right?
Sure.
And it's a very rude shock to go from, for a lot of us being in a social environment, hanging out with friends, to all of a sudden finding ourselves at home all the time, not going out much. So I think that's the other aspect that programs like this solve, right? Which is providing a social environment in which those friendships can develop. Because I think learning is not just in a formal way that it happens, right? You don't just learn from a mentor or a teacher, but in the environment where you're building something with a friend, then you learn together.
Sure.
I think there's that aspect to it as well. And of course, people who are making career transitions want a structured learning environment, because I think the issue that's happened with the internet is, as amazing as it is to have all of this information, now we have the other problem, which is there's too much information now. How do I make sense of all of this? Like, who do I ask? Who do I trust? Where do I even start? Right? And what do I do if I get stuck? Like, these are the sort of questions that people tend to have. And a structured learning environment sort of solves for this and helps them focus and know that, okay, these are the things I need to focus on. This is who I should ask, and this is what's going to happen at the end of it. So I think it sort of helps provide some level of certainty, which I think people really like.
Sure. That's
But-
interesting. Yeah. Kedar, please go on.
No, I just wanted to ask you then, when you went to NID, like,
I didn't go to NID.
as in, when you wanted to just like check out what's the scene there, did you find any difference between, you said it was quite open at Stanford and like a different kind of environment. So did you reflect back and see that there's some, as in, why should like a university or a college let you in if you're not academically or like enrolled there? You have given some thought around it कि ऐसा क्यों हो रहा था, या where is the gap?
So to understand your question correctly, are you asking why is it not open in India, or are you asking why?
Yeah.
I'm not sure why, to be honest. I think traditionally there are routes of education which are quite problematic, in the sense that traditionally knowledge has been kept safeguarded or sort of protected, if I can even use that word, right, by certain people who have been in power from certain other people, right? I don't know if it actually comes from there, but the reality is that it does feel fairly sort of inaccessible, right? I think some universities have tried to make it more accessible. So I think IISc does public talks. Some universities do hold exhibitions, but I don't think it compares to sort of the level of openness in the US. At least from my experience of visiting both Stanford and Northwestern.
I think it's also a function of college versus university. Maybe universities have bigger campus, so I think Kalina, you can walk in anytime. BHU, you can walk in anytime and just see like some random classes, as opposed to like a standalone college, which has a campus, but still it's a single college. Maybe that could be a function. I don't know. But yeah, just like for the digression.
Yep.
Yeah.
Another thing is, Shreyas, like when you talk about mid-career designers, right? So fine, we don't have a great educational setup, but then you get into a company. Most of these needs, do you like, they should be fulfilled within the company setup at least? Do you think like organizations these days are not doing a good enough job of providing, that those answers that you said these people are seeking within the organizations?
So from my understanding, it seems like there are very few companies that have, even mid-sized design teams in India, right? Of course, your team is almost an anomaly, right? In terms of how mature it is. From my observation, a lot of designers work in either very small teams, or even sometimes they work as a solo designer. And sometimes they don't even report to a designer, right? And what they tend to miss is feedback on a craft level in terms of how they can actually improve as a designer. And that's what they really look for, and they don't get that. And that's why they look for mentorship outside of work.
So the next thing I want to know is like, could you unpack this fellowship business for us a little bit?
Yeah, and also what Ownpath, I mean, now it's the curiosity is building. Since I've read about it, if you can also give us like a brief idea about what exactly is it, a course, is it a program, and then maybe like what Abhinit asked about the fellowship. Is there any criteria or something like that?
Right. So the Product Design Fellowship is a 4-month intensive program, right, where junior designers define their own project, work in teams, and at the end of it, showcase their project on demo day. Right? It's not a traditional course. There are, of course, master classes. We do have sessions where they learn from design leaders like Abhinit himself. But really, the key focus is them defining a project, learning how to identify a problem, and iterate towards a solution. And what we're trying to really achieve here is several things. Okay, so from the learner side of things, we're trying to put them in an environment where they become comfortable with ambiguity, uncertainty. Right? When nobody is around to tell them what to do, are they capable of identifying a problem and working towards a solution? Do they have some process where if they feel stuck, they know that they have to go back and talk to users, or they may have to iterate on the solution a little more, or they have to go talk to a senior designer for some guidance, right? So I think what we're trying to create is this environment in which acts as a forcing function for them to really push themselves, an environment in which they may not have found themselves before. So that is one. That's the purpose of that, sort of the thinking behind the fellowship. The other aspect is from the company side of things. What we really want to do is the fellowship should become a very strong signal for employers when it comes to hiring, right? Essentially, what we're trying to communicate here is anybody who is graduating out of a fellowship has demonstrated a very strong sense of ownership, because they actually defined a project and saw it through at least 1 or 2 iterations, right? They demonstrated grit, right? Because it takes grit to actually work through an intensive program like this, even for 4 months. And some of them did this while holding a day job, right? It also demonstrates communication skills, because they have to present their work on a regular basis, right? Whether it's through internal review sessions, whether it's through a demo day, they have to communicate. Otherwise, they don't sort of quote unquote graduate, right? They have to collaborate. They all work in teams, right? And one of the things that I'm really excited about for the future is how we can have sort of our learning environment resemble an actual, product team. In the sense that can we have a product pod, right, where you have a product manager and a product designer working together to build the product, right? And so that the experience is as real as it actually can be, right?
Sure.
So this is what we're trying to do. Basically create a high signal proxy for employers that they can use to determine, hey, this person has gone through an intensive program. These are the attributes I can tell, apart from, of course, the technical skills that this person is supposed to have in terms of design or in terms of any other craft we're helping them out.
Sure. One interesting thing there, Shreyas, like your stress on designers being able to find a problem, right? That feels a little personal. I sense there's something behind it, because typically what we are used to hearing is designers are problem solvers, right? And the problems are generally surfaced in organizations by the business people, right? Because they are the ones who understand, the business models. They're the ones who set the goals, or product managers, right? Why such a stress on designers being able to identify problems for themselves?
So I'm not sure if it's a linear process, or it's best done as a linear process in the sense that, a designer or an engineer is given a problem, and that problem is never questioned or not refined, and sort of they start working on the answer, right? I think a lot can be learned by questioning the problem itself, right? And sort of digging deeper and really understanding the question before getting to the solution. This is something that I've observed in my own practice before. I've observed in some of the students that we also work with, right? Which is there's this tendency to focus a little too much on the solution, right? Or focus a little too much on the first solution sometimes, and then get excited by it and sort of get distracted almost, right? Whereas I think our emphasis here is, while solutions of course are important, of course we're here to solve problems, but let's make sure we're solving the right problem.
Sure.
I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does.
In fact, मैं थोड़ा tangent ले रहा हूँ. So, like one of my friend was asking कि designers करते क्या हैं, and I have this example, and I think I'm stuck with that example. If you can help me with a similar example, it will be great. So, एक example which I give is the product manager will come with a solution most likely कि यार AC का remote बड़ा कर दो, and to which the designer asks कि why, and he says like it gets lost, like sometimes in the couch or sometimes below the pillow or some bed ke niche. It's small and it just gets lost. To which like I say that like a decently experienced designer might think of some solution, but like yeah, I mean maybe like a more experienced designer would say कि यार इस remote चाहिए ही क्यों, right? The problem is like
Exactly.
directly like sensors लगा दो, room में कोई है तो AC on, otherwise off, something to that effect. But that's one solution, that's one scene or situation which I have. You have any other like one example which you can give where you try and push the designer to find a problem?
So can I talk about my own personal experience with this?
Please.
Yeah.
So the first year of Ownpath I was essentially trying to figure out a better online learning experience, right? So it was around, okay, how do you make the experience interactive and social? So, how do you design exercises in a way that people don't get bored? That was essentially my focus, right? But in about a year or so, I had to take a step back and realize, wait, what is the actual problem I'm trying to solve here? Is there a market for this problem? Are there enough people who are willing to pay for this problem? And how big of a problem is this even? Right? Because this seems like a problem that I'm personally more excited about, but it has to also meet what people actually require. Right? So that's sort of when I had to take a step back and understand, wait, what does the people actually want? And in that framework, how does this better learning environment fit in? Does that make sense? So I think it is super important to like take a step back now and then to really identify, wait, is this the right problem to be solving? And it's sort of then when I actually had a chance to talk to Abhinit about really doing a program for their senior designers, and I was also in parallel thinking of a program for people who are making a career transition. Right? Because I recognize that the actual problem in the market is people want to make this difficult career transition with so many question marks. And that's where this better learning experience, quote unquote, can actually be useful, right? Instead of it being a thing in itself. Because one of the other things I have to sort of, accept almost is for a lot of people, learning is a means to something, right? Especially in India, which is very understandable that learning is usually a means to either a job or a promotion. And sometimes, of course, it is an end in itself. But when you're running a business, it really becomes important to identify, wait, what is the problem that people are more serious about, especially when it comes to, paying for it. Right? So this is the kind of experience I had for myself in terms of, wait, zeroing in on the actual specific problem that will keep my business alive instead of just like going after problems that I'm personally excited about.
Interesting.
There's a famous quote, Kedar. It goes something like, the customer doesn't want a 9-inch hole, 9-inch drill. The customer wants a 9-inch hole in their wall.
Yeah,
Exactly.
correct.
Oh.
Yeah. Speaking about who are the people who want this, right? So is there any criteria to apply for Ownpath? As in like, is there a judging process that this person is allowed, this person of this background is more suitable, and there are any deal breakers? Because वही है, मतलब दान भी सत्पात्री रहना चाहिए ना, मतलब like जिसको दे रहे हो उसको, like that person should value also, right? So it's a tricky one, right? You can't teach everyone. So how does that happen?
Right. So I've actually written a blog post about this, but we actually want to admit as many people as possible, right? It is in the service of our mission. It is actually also a business interest to admit as many people as possible, while of course holding some level of standard, right? But the main decision that we are essentially taking is this the right time for this person to come into the program? That is it. Right? It's almost never that this person has the wrong background, or it's almost never that the case with that. It's mostly a question of, does this person have the requisite background so that they are feeling like they're part of the rest of the cohort. Right? They're part of the cohort which is also at a similar level, because they all have to work together. Right? So you can't have people with very different experience levels working on projects together, at least in a learning environment. So that's the thinking behind that. But we don't really reject people, and that is something that I don't really like from the university side of things, because I've had my applications turned down by universities like way back as well. Right? Like I know how it felt like when I was rejected by MIT. Right? So I don't want to be in that kind of a situation where we are rejecting people, because I don't think we are some arbiters of who gets to learn or who doesn't get to. Absolutely not. We definitely see it as, hey, is this the right time? Will you benefit the most by joining us right now? If not, here are certain resources that you can use to learn, and come back to us for the next cohort, or maybe 2 cohorts down the line. We're still going to be here, and we'd love to admit you.
Awesome.
But that said, some requirements we look for is, at least around 2 years worth of experience in a design field, whether that's digital design or graphic design. Are they able to communicate their work with some clarity? I think one of the sort of anti-patterns, if you will, I've seen across profiles is I just see screenshots of either graphic design with zero explanation. I don't know if this person has designed it. I don't know if the team has designed it. Sometimes I have no idea, right? So, which is why we sort of try to get them to communicate with who designed this, how many people actually were part of it, what is the impact, and it's okay if it had no impact. I mean, that's fine. But at least what is the result of it? What did you learn from it? I think the learning part is actually what we really look for. Are you able to reflect on what you did? Zero judgment on whether something worked or not, because sometimes it's not in our hands. But are we able to reflect and learn from what happened? So these are some of the sort of signals we look for to prioritize applications, not so much reject them.
And the reason why I ask you is because when I was in Book My Show, I had a very huge team of about 35, not as compared to Gojek, but yeah, it was pretty huge for me coming from ClearTrip. 35 designers in the graphic team. And most of them were really good at their craft. But somehow graphic design, what's the North Star, where the graphic design as a profession will go, maybe they were not exposed to that. So everyone just wanted to be part of the product team or the UI, UX team, whatever they call it. And they wanted to do courses. They were coming to me and saying, ye course karu kya, wo course karu kya? And I was clueless what to do. So have you seen, or what has been your observation with respect to graphic designers transitioning to become UI UX? Because in my opinion, they're like two different breeds altogether, especially when I speak to illustrators and graphic designers of like 20, 30 years of experience. There's a huge learning in the graphic space also. So I treat them as two different spaces, but somehow a lot of people are confused. You see some patterns there, or any observations you want to share?
So from the folks I've seen at Ownpath, I think the challenge is mostly around the medium, right? Basically understanding what are the limitations of the digital medium, what are the possibilities, right? Like, for example, what are the APIs available on, say, Chrome, right? I mean, this just takes a little bit of learning. And then, of course, understanding and designing for an interactive medium. Because usually, like, for example, we have somebody coming in from textile design, right? I mean, while their process of understanding who you're designing for, understanding what your budget constraints are and so on might translate fairly well to product design as well. Understanding the medium becomes the main thing, right? Sort of thinking through that whole experience that somebody is going to go through. But these are skills that I think can definitely be learned, because at least in my opinion, the harder thing is taste. And that I've found that they usually have.
Interesting. Before we jump next, let's take a quick break. We'll be right back. Okay, welcome back to the show.
So, Shreya, could you dig a little bit more into how has the experience been so far with conducting the cohorts that you have? Is there any particular insight about, their psychology, or any observations or patterns that you've seen after giving this a few trials that you'd like to share?
Or how do you judge the taste also?
Yeah.
Or how do you build the taste? I would say not judge, but build the
Yeah.
taste, because that has been my personal curiosity. All my the people whom I work with, I just say, यार देखो, like मतलब 10 genre के गाने सुनो, and 10 like just explore and expose yourself to variety of things. So
Yes, absolutely. And I was actually thinking about this, right? And one is, like you said, really observing amazing work out there, sort of trying to reverse engineer what might have gone into it, or what makes something good, right? So that's one. But I think the other thing that at least I personally benefited from is just hanging out with people who have significantly better taste than I do, right? Like I years back, I didn't have good taste when it comes to design or writing, what have you, right? Or writing code or what. Like I noticed my own writing significantly improve after spending a few months writing my statement of purpose. And I had somebody helping me writing that, right? And he really put me through like some level of rigor, right? Like he made sure every sentence was proofread and he made sure I was crafting it well. He made sure every paragraph was flowing well one to the next, right? And that sort of really changed how I write. Like I would look back at my previous writing and I would cringe, right? And this is the same experience I had with programming. Right? I was lucky to have bosses who really made sure I was writing good quality code. Right? I was lucky to sort of have folks who had much better taste in terms of design than I did, and that's how I sort of picked up my own taste. Right? And I found that this applied across whether it's cooking, whether it's how you treat people, right? Like all of this I've learned by just hanging out with people who had better taste, right? And that's also sort of what we're trying to create with this environment, right? Like just by exposing them and getting feedback from folks who much further ahead in terms of learning curve, in terms of taste, I think it's just so much more faster to pick that up. In terms of being able to tell if something is good or not, why something is not good enough, right? Because I think once you show something like enough number of times to like a mentor, you're able to predict what your mentors might say. At least that's definitely happened to me, right? So I think that's definitely helped build taste. And of course, the other thing is sort of really observing high quality work and understanding what went into it. And to answer Abhinit's question, in terms of psychology, I think this is really tricky to answer without causing controversy as such.
It's okay, feel free.
we,
Nobody
we
listens.
love
Yeah.
controversies.
So one thing, like I mentioned earlier, was I think falling in love with the solution, right? Like it's the sometimes it's folks come up with a first solution and they're just really reticent to let go of it. Falling in love with the problem, right? Or at least falling in love with their framing of the problem, right? And sort of helping them be a little detached towards both the problem and the solution, because it's important to learn that you may be solving the wrong problem in the first place. Forget about the solution, right? So that's one. Two, I think learning to take feedback is also a skill. I think it's very easy to get defensive, especially when taking feedback, slightly public setting. I mean, it's not obviously not totally public. There's like 10 people in the cohort, but even then, I think it requires some level of maturity, if you will, right? To be able to take feedback in a way that's not personal. And we, of course, absolutely make sure that no feedback is personal on any level, right? It's always about the work and how the work can improve.
And one more thing is like this is really interesting because you don't just want these folks to be students, right? You want them to teach each other as well, right?
Yes.
So
yes.
how's that worked out? Like, did it work out exactly like you hoped it would, or did it take some coaxing? Or
I think it actually worked very well because I understand they created their own WhatsApp group and apparently was buzzing in terms of them discussing what's going on, the challenges they were facing, and so on. So I think we did fairly well in creating this environment which resulted in a community. Right? And I hope these folks will stay in touch for a really long time, and they suddenly have this peer group that they can run their ideas past or potentially build side projects with and so on. Yeah, and I think we also had peer review sessions where we had these folks provide feedback to each other, which also helped because that's something that they will be expected to do at work. And it's important that they know how to sort of structure their feedback, and again, in a way that's not personal and that's actually constructive.
Sure. I very strongly relate to that personally because I barely went to college. My college was all of 3 years. And I don't remember a single lecture from any of my professors. God bless them. I'm sure they were good. But I've never been able to learn in a classroom setting, right? Like I zone out. But everything that I've learned, even to this day, it's because of the batchmates that I lucked out to have in my batch, right? It was these people who were geeking out on stuff. It was these people who kind of inspired me to not just sit on my computer and watch movies all day, but do something productive with my life because all of these other people were. So I find this very interesting and very intriguing and good to know that it's working out there. And good to know that it didn't take a lot of coaxing for you, right, for this to get going.
Yeah, I think it being so intensive may have contributed towards this inadvertently. Like if it was just a series of lectures, I think it may not have had this effect. And because it was so intensive that it sort of got them to form a community.
Sure.
Yeah. We'll change gears a bit because I think we've covered a fair bit of the designer aspect of it, as in like the people who come to learn and come to build, be in that environment which is conducive. The business side of things. So, Shreyas, if you can give some insights on like what are the important considerations which designers are oblivious to or are not aware of from a business standpoint, the business realities, the ground realities of operations, and a lot of people have been saying this that design should be at the table, but I believe it's just another cog in the entire scheme of things. So, any take on that? Does the program cover that? Make them sensitive?
Sure. So I think again I can speak about this from personal experience as well. um, so I believe good products really take time, capital, blood, sweat, and tears to build, right? And hopefully not blood, but they just take a lot of time and effort to build, right? And I think it's important to realize that because as craft people, there can be this tendency to over-index on perfectionism, right? Like especially in the initial stages, right? Like we want to get that initial product really good, and before we ship it, of course, I'm not generalizing, but there is this tendency to ship things that we're not proud of. But the consequence of doing that is potentially lost business, potentially being late to the market, right? Um, I think just understanding this is really important because products don't happen in silos. They happen in a certain context, right? That context is the business in which it operates in. The business itself operates in a market context, and the timing needs to be ready for a product to actually be successful. So there are all these things that really require for a product to actually work. Right? In fact, like most products fail, right? I think the recent statistic I thought I saw was like about 72% of products fail, at least when it comes to new product development.
Yep.
Right? And why is, I mean, that seems very odd that so many products fail. And at least my understanding is that either it's because people are building the wrong product, right? Or there's not a big enough market for the product that it sort of eventually died, or they're not charging enough for the product, right? It doesn't have a sustainable business model. So I think it's very easy to forget that products require this context in which they thrive. Right, it's sort of like, I guess, like plants, right? Like it needs a certain kind of soil, it needs, water and all these, it needs sunlight, and without which there is no plant, right? So I think maybe that's a reasonable analogy. And it's easy to sort of forget all of this and just focus on the plant, but you also need that broader context for product as well.
And do you get some
Sure.
pushback from the designers when you try to, teach them these things? Because just yesterday, I think I saw Andy Budd raging on Twitter about the same thing, that, hey, designers kind of, that they never seem to get that this is not the right time for perfection. They don't seem to, empathize with business. And I saw some people replying there with similar things that you said, Shreyas, which is that, engineering seems to get it far better. Engineering understands that there is premature refactoring, that, when you're launching a product, it's basically a shot in the dark and there's a high chance of it failing. So why make things perfect? Do your designers tell you, like, why are you telling us these things? Or why is it like, isn't it just good enough to make great products and people will come?
It's hard. I think it really takes time to drive this home. And I think it just has to come through personal experience, and which is why we get them to have this personal experience, right? Of creating a product themselves and being emotionally attached to it. I think that's the other aspect, right? Because they define their own project, there is this emotional attachment that also comes in. And once that attachment comes in, you don't want to see something ugly that you're putting out, that you're so emotionally attached to, right? Especially as a designer, right? So I just think it takes time to learn, but it is something that we do emphasize on. Because, okay, I don't want to sound controversial here, but
Why? It's free.
but I think it's important to realize the difference between product design and being a product designer, right? And that those two things can be different, right? In the sense that product design is like the result of many different forces, right? Like there's monetization, there's growth, and there's like budget constraints and all sort of things, organizational structures, right? And there's basically this thing called Conway's law, which says that you ship interfaces and software that mimics your communication structures. And then I've experienced this myself in my previous job, right? So
Oh yeah,
product design is,
yeah.
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. No, please go ahead. Sorry for interrupting. I was going to say that I can look at apps and tell what teams this company has.
Right. So product design is the result of all these things: organizational structures, what is your growth strategy, who you're selling to, right? Like, for example, if it's an enterprise product, that can have a fairly significant influence on product design, how that product is designed, right? And I want to get into that a little more, but there are all these things that go into the design or of the product or the experience. I think it's really useful and important to realize that. And at least I'm more excited about the role of a designer as a facilitator in this whole process, because they really understand, or at least they're supposed to understand, what is the actual problem that the audience is facing, the user is facing, and how can we make sure that we're solving that problem? Because that's the short way of staying in business long time. Because if you build something that users really love, they'll keep giving you business. At least that's what I'd like to believe.
यार हमको कुछ कोट्स है ना, डिजाइन लेजेंड्स के कोट्स नेगेट करने चाहिए. Like I was reading one quote by Massimo Vagnoli कि if done right it will stay forever. तो यार इससे बहुत इंस्पायर होके लाइक डन राइट के पीछे पड़ जाते हैं, and then that perfection is difficult to achieve, so you end up just iterating without even testing.
Yeah, and I think Vignelli did not meet this mess called software, no? Right? Like he was a little ahead of his time. So I'm sure he's right when it comes to print. He's right when it comes to he did this graphics arts collection, right? He was right about those things. Software is a stupid thing. Like some of the civil engineers I've talked to, when they see what software engineers do in the name of engineering, they refuse to accept that this is engineering, right? Because software engineers, like if you just dig into, and Shreyas is very well familiar with that, right? Like software engineers know that everything that they make is going to be obsolete in 6 months, and if it is not obsolete, they'll make it obsolete themselves, right? So I think this medium itself has changed. Like it's like an unstoppable force meeting an immovable object, right? Unstoppable force being this design perfectionism, and the immovable object is the medium of software, right?
Yeah, right. Interesting way to put it.
By the way, I think engineers also make this mistake in the sense that engineers love writing code, right? Yeah. But in a lot of cases, you shouldn't be writing code, because every line of code you write, especially if it's not earning you money, it's a liability. You have to sit around and maintain it. And who's going to do that? Who's going to do sales if you're sitting around making code, right? And there are times when you have to use some form software or whatever is already available, and not fall to this tendency of being an engineer, right? So I think it applies to engineers as well. So which is why I think it's more about the craftsperson trying to build a business, and that's the challenge to overcome. Right? Like how do you sort of take off that hat, or when to take off that hat, and when to sort of be a little more pragmatic in terms of shipping and the learning from that experience as well. Yeah, I think the other thing I want to talk about, which I'm actually curious to know what you folks think, is I have sometimes seen this tendency of not putting stuff out there, almost out of a fear of it being sort of invalidated in some way, right? Like if you put something out, what if nobody likes it? What if you don't get good feedback? Or what if nobody uses it? I have seen that at times. But I think what's really important to learn, and this is something that we, again, help these folks learn, is you have to iterate quickly. Right? You have to put things out there. It doesn't matter. If you feel embarrassed, get over it. Right? Because you're not going to learn until your product meets reality. Right? No plan survives. I think there's a saying, right? And like no plan survives, the actual battle or something like that.
Yeah.
But essentially, you have to put it out there and learn from what feedback you're getting from users, and use that to iterate, because it's all about that iteration.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, like Austin Kleon's book, man, Show Your Work. That guy wrote a New York Times bestseller on this one topic, and it's a beautifully illustrated book. And that's one book I give almost all the designers. But Shreyas, I do have to say that in the environment today, and with the quality of feedback you get if you share your work on those popular websites, right? I'd be scared myself. Like, I'm glad, like, I was doing this 10 years ago. Right now, like, people just hate it. Right? Like, so any thoughts on the quality of feedback? Because it's very easy to tell people you should know how to take feedback, right? And it works great within a learning environment which is curated. But
Mhm.
internet these days is just silly,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Right.
with
So,
it.
yeah, right.
Sorry to interrupt, but before Shreyas gives answer or just shares his views, I think मेरा take थोड़ा सा अलग है ये question पे कि why, I mean, yes, an artist wants appreciation. So an artist needs to be perfectionist or at least strive for perfection. मतलब वही है कि 30-40 साल रियाज करके फिर स्टेज पे उतरो जब गुरु हाँ बोले तो ठीक है that school works there. यहाँ पे तो ऑब्जेक्टिव है ना मतलब if I make like an ugly sign up form and I get like million sign ups a day, why do I need to validate it with like a community? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Also, yeah, and just to clarify, when I said feedback in the context of putting work out there, I didn't mean feedback in terms of other people telling you how your work is. I meant it as, hey, this is my product, and sort of seeing if people actually use it or not. So that sort of feedback, right? Like usage, feedback in terms of usage. Are people actually using it? Are people actually, continuing to use it, or are they dropping off? So that's the kind of feedback I mentioned, not opinions about what your product is like.
Yeah, interesting.
So I was just going to talk about, like, we've talked about designers having a seat at the table. We've talked about designers needing to understand, the ins and outs of business. But does business value design, Shreyas, in your opinion? Because I think you're also getting designers placed in companies and all, right? So you have a perspective on this which we might not have. What's your point of view on design being a competitive advantage? Like, I'm a glass half full person on this. I don't see a lot of companies who are making a lot of money simply as a result of shipping a great customer experience, right? Where do you stand on this? Is design really a competitive advantage?
Right. I think it also depends on the market in which the company is operating. As for example, in tech, I mean, Apple is a very evident case of differentiating on a better experience, right? But if you look at the airlines market, especially in India, right, it's probably more about designing better processes to optimize on cost than on experience. I think Vistara is trying to differentiate on experience, but by and large, it's about achieving low cost. So I think it depends on the market in which the product or the company is operating in. But I am optimistic about this changing for the better. And to give you an example, I think traditionally the enterprise software market has been pretty atrocious, if I can, to be polite, if you will, right? I mean, in terms of the quality of software that they actually ship. And I think that's mostly, I don't think it's a reflection of the designers in that company, right? It's mostly a reflection of the business model, right? Because the buyer is different from the user. All the company cares about is selling and keeping that contract, right? So basically not devoting enough time or money towards product design. But that has been changing over the past few years, right? If you sort of see companies like Slack or Notion or Airtable, they also make their money from businesses, but their growth strategy has been fundamentally different, right? They've gone with a bottom-up strategy where they've got individuals or small teams within companies to adopt their software, right? And if you look at Slack, usually it's been, big companies, one team adopted it, they really liked it, and some other team saw it and they wanted to use it, and that's how they grew. Like, they didn't really need this massive sales force like a traditional enterprise company needed, right? It's the same table. And of course, I think you've used IRC before, and Slack is not a traditionally new mental model, at least compared to IRC, right? It's obviously differentiating in terms of user experience, right? And it's the same case with Airtable. If you look at Google Sheets and Airtable, what is the fundamental difference here, right? You could make the argument that this is the next iteration in terms of how a spreadsheet-based software should work. Of course, Airtable does not have numerical functions as sophisticated as Google Sheet does, but at the same time, Airtable does allow it to be used as a content management system, right? But anyway, so coming back to the point, these are these sort of B2B companies that are sort of bucking that trend and differentiating on experience, And that I think is very exciting. I think locally, I have only good things to say about Razorpay, right? And they've really done well in terms of developer experience.
Mm.
So, and I think it's also gotten to a point where the standard for design with B2B is almost like people expect it to be as good as consumer apps, right? People expect it to be as good as Instagram, right? And the standards have definitely gone up. So I am optimistic about it meaning good business also because now B2B businesses, especially in India, are appealing to global markets, right? It's not just India. And so their design has to be, top notch, especially when they are competing with companies, in a little more mature markets like Western Europe or the US. So definitely hopeful in terms of some markets, whether it's in B2B tech in terms of design being a competitive advantage. But I think some markets, just their nature of being low cost services, there it might be a little difficult to differentiate in design.
Sure. That's an interesting view on that. So what I'm hearing is that if you're a designer and you want to work for a company where design really makes a difference, you'll have a better luck trying out in B2B markets than B2C markets. I know it's a very narrow reading of what you said, but that's what I heard.
I mean, in B2C as well, B2C is really wide, right? So in B2C, there are companies that appeal to a fairly wide section of the audience, which do take design seriously. I mean, like, of course, what you folks do, or at home, what, Swiggy does as well, or, a lot of the apps do appeal to a fairly wide range of audience. But there are some companies that don't do that. They appeal to other sections of the market where cost is more important, right? And the experience is not as important. So I think it also depends on the segment of the market, the priority. But yes, I agree with your point that at least if I were a designer today, I would probably look at companies where design is actually helping them differentiate.
And you have again, like the cohorts, any indicators that people, at least designers, young designers, are more game or more inclined towards B2C products as opposed to B2B? You have seen any trend there?
I mean, I don't know if I can call it a trend. I also don't know how they are informing their decision process right now, right? Beyond it seeming cool to work in, or I heard something interesting about it. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know if there's a clear rationale in terms of why they want to work in a certain section of companies. But one thing I will sort of emphasize on is, especially as a crafts person, I think it's also really important to go work where you will find good mentorship, right? Where a team in which you can learn. At least that's what's personally been very helpful to me, right? Apart from the company itself, what has been very important for me is who am I learning from, right? Can I sort of really pick up on skills that they have that I don't have, sort of build that taste, like I mentioned earlier. I think that's also a very important factor because this is a craft that essentially gets built through sort of apprenticeship. Right? Even if you get hired from a company, it doesn't mean like you stop learning, right? I mean, the learning only starts getting even more real because now you have clients to service, you have products to share, right? So that the stakes on that learning have now just gone up, right? So an environment which fosters learning is all the more important.
Cool. I think I have one last question. Abhinit, you have anything more to ask before?
I have lots of things. One thing I want to know, but I'm careful of the time as well. One thing, Shreyas, I want to know is like, do you have anything interesting to share about what you found companies to be looking for in designers these days? Right? Because you're kind of, finding a double, product market fit, right? On one side, it's what do designers need? Can I give them that? And on the other side, it's what do companies need? So any interesting stories or any trends or any thoughts on what are companies looking for in designers?
I think this varies wildly, to be really honest with you, right? Because it really depends on who is the person hiring. I found sometimes companies have founders who are hiring designers, but they don't really know how to hire because they don't come from design backgrounds or they have not really hired designers before that much. To the point of course, at this level of spectrum, like a Gojek or Razorpay. So it's usually somewhere in between the spectrum. But I think we are definitely, I don't see the emphasis on identifying the problem as much in the industry. And I think that's a little unfortunate. I think this sort of boundary between product managers being responsible for identifying the problem and designers being responsible for delivering just solution is, in my opinion, unfortunate. So I think the expectations companies tend to have is, can this person, whip out screens, work with the PM to create these prototypes and then work with the developer to ship them. So yeah, I've not been too impressed in terms of what companies usually require from designers. But we are definitely making sure we get these people to learn in a way that they are capable of performing in the most, design mature company.
I'm guessing that it's a bit diplomatic, but we'll talk about after recording. Yeah, I wish we should do one more of the series also, generally a longer session. But yeah, because of the format of this, one last question which I wanted to ask you, Shreyas, was since this is own path now, how do you envision the future of Indian designers? Obviously, India in a context of design, digital design, if you want to say, do we see having more? Do we see having design founders, or how would you continue the journey to build a good pedigree of designers in India, or if you have other plans as well?
Right. So I don't have a definitive answer to this question. I think it's more going to be exploratory, and I'm sort of just going to share what I have in mind and what I hope to see rather than what I think will happen. I think just to the last point you made, I'm personally more interested in seeing better design products and services than seeing more designers per se, right? And I think that more people are responsible for design than just design, right? And this goes all the way to founders and heads of other functions and what have you. So that said, I think there's still so many problems around us, right? And there's just still so much to do, right? I mean, it might seem like there's just so much capital in the market, so many companies innovating and all of that, but there's still so many problems. In fact, we had our healthcare system essentially collapsing in the country, right, a few months back. Right? I mean, that's just one of those problems, but I think there's no shortage of problems in the coming years to work on. So one of the things I'm really hoping that the gap is that the gap shortens between people who are very comfortable with computing devices and people who are not. Right? And I'm thinking folks definitely my parents, right, who are nowhere as comfortable with phones or computers as I am or as my brother is, right? Or folks who don't come from backgrounds where they've been used to using these devices, or maybe they're sort of first generation mobile users, right? And we sort of saw that in the initial stages with the Coven platform rollout, right? I mean, I think it was in English, and it wasn't particularly clear how people who didn't know how to use this or weren't comfortable with English would use this and get vaccinated. I think they've now changed it to people can walk in and get vaccinated. But the point is that I think we really have to figure out how do we include more people into this sort of computing revolution that's happening, right? That's definitely one I hope to see happen in India, because there's just so many people in India, and it's I think Twitter and LinkedIn might make it feel like a lot of people are already on this, but I am actually currently living in a tier 2 town right now, and I've been living here this year. And I know how many people are just not comfortable with these devices, the ways in which they're not comfortable. Yeah, I think the other thing I'm curious to see is sort of more design at the level of systems, as opposed to sort of very tactical interventions, right? So, for example, getting food delivered at home with a few buttons pressed is really cool, but can we also account for all the plastic that's getting generated? Right? How do we design for lesser plastic, right? Or building a better mosquito repellent. Sure, it's useful, but how do we redesign our spaces so there are lesser mosquitoes in the first place, right? And this is, by the way, coming from somebody who had dengue twice 2 years back. So I think I also speak with some level of pain there. So I think those are more on the macro level. But I think on the micro level, I do hope we sort of, as an industry, definitely develop better taste in terms of what is respectful to users, what is actually good in the longer term, and not just like constantly optimize for like short-term metrics, like show a pop-up here or like check a box by default there, and like these run some numbers in the short term, but like what is the trust that you're building with users in the longer term? And I really hope we take a deeper look at those issues as well, because I really think better design can like save lives and can make our lives much better than it actually is right.
Oh, that was like lot of inspiration there. So thanks for sharing that with us. Cool. We'll conclude. Yeah, thank you for your time, and it was really wonderful having you. And obviously, Abhinit, thanks for joining in.
Anytime.
Thank you, both of you, for having me.
So thanks for listening till the end. Currently, I'm heading the design at Jupiter.money, and we are hiring at all levels. So visit jupiter.money/careers. You can follow Audiogyan on Instagram at Audiogyan Moments and visit audiogyan.com for more GAN sessions. Abhinit, you want to have like a plug?
Yes, we are opening up hiring very slowly, but surely at Gojek Design. You can follow us at Gojek Design on Twitter, and we post all our openings there.
Awesome. Shreyas, I don't know when is your next cohort, and I don't know when this episode will go live, but you guys, like, you want to just plug in, like, visit ownpath.xyz, and anything else people can connect with you.
So, I mean, if you folks are interested in design education, please do follow Ownpath_XYZ on Twitter. And please, do subscribe to our mailing list as well. And watch out to some of the events that we're also going to be increasingly doing. The next cohort is going to be announced soon. Yeah, I'd love to connect with more folks in terms of design education, how we can help them in their careers.
Awesome. All right, thank you. And that's it from today's GAN session. For show notes and more GAN, visit audiogyan.com. If you like this podcast, please don't forget to check our other interesting podcast on IVM Network. You can listen to us on IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or any of your favorite podcasting apps. To stay tuned, follow us on Twitter and Instagram at IVM Podcast. And if you wish to connect with me, I am at Audiogyan Moments on Instagram. Until then, take care.